Yeah, I mean, you can't be too self-righteous. Yeah, thanks a lot for coming. This is Scribe Light. He has a great YouTube channel. I'm a big fan. Yeah, I first heard you on Kurt Metzger maybe like a year ago.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, he's so a different YouTuber friend of mine, Sinatra Says, featured part of a video I did on his channel, and Kurt saw that there and then contacted me to have me on his show, and I'm completely flattered out of the blue and very grateful for it.
Yeah, so you kind of have like alias and stuff, and like don't go on camera.
Yes.
Is that because was there any reason, or you just like did that randomly?
Originally, and well, primarily because at the time I started this, and maybe to a lesser extent these days, or maybe I'm not as worried about it. There could be, depending on your opinions on certain things, real life backlash, and just for the sake of not. But part of there's several reasons that drew me to YouTube in the first place, but part of it was that it was difficult to speak my mind on, say, Facebook amongst people that I knew without becoming a pariah of one kind or another.
Oh.
And so I just thought, I mean, and in other ways, who I am is, I think, irrelevant. I don't. I make it very plain that I'm not a academic expert in anything in particular. I don't have any kind of credentials or whatever. I'm just a guy with an English major, and other than that, anything else is just what I have to say or think or otherwise. So, and I like having a certain level of buffer between myself and I guess the rest of the world in a way.
Yeah. So you did you start doing like did you start doing like the channel because you were like just seeing a lot of crazy stuff you wanted to like comment on?
Yeah. There, like I said, there's a lot of things that led me up to giving it a shot. I was inspired by a couple of other YouTubers that I'd been looking at for a couple of years at that point, and and like I said, the Facebook and other places where I'd had an opportunity to debate or discuss some of these things were becoming places where any opinion that didn't go along with the majority was a mark of shame or something.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I decided to just experiment with it one day. I was on a social media site which I don't really use anymore, but I used at the time, called Minds. It's still out there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
yeah, and I randomly met on there one day a guy from Britain who said, or well, I guess the UK, and he said, "I'm having a live stream. Anybody want to come on?" And this was back when YouTube and Google actually had a live stream link-in service instead of having to do it through OBS or something. Back when Google Hangouts was a thing. And I was just like, sure, I'll come on. I'd never been on YouTube before. I'd never been on a live stream before. And so I just popped in and talked with them for a bit about stuff. And as I've told the story before, afterwards I thought, well, if this idiot can do it, I can do it. And he's now one of my longtime YouTube friends, Irate Alex on YouTube. He's a really great guy, and but between him and a couple other YouTubers I'd seen and paid attention to for the year or so prior, I just said, well, I'll give it a shot. My social life is effectively imploded because of several things, and I got nothing else to do. And this might be a nice outlet and something creative I can try. And yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah. So you used to, did you ever get in, like, have your friends, like, lose any friends for your opinions before?
Oh yeah. No. Well, the most dramatic example was just before the 2016 election. Oh. And this was, I'm pretty sure, if I remember the timing correctly, because this was slightly before I started doing YouTube videos, so it might have been sort of the maybe the straw that broke the camel's back in that sense. I put on there was a discussion on Facebook, if you can believe it, about the upcoming election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and somewhere in there I put the comment saying that I was not going to vote in the presidential election because I didn't have any particular liking for either candidate, and so I was going to abstain. Yeah, heaven forfend. And my best friend at the time, who I'd known and been friends with for a decade at that point, she saw this and she contacted me privately, and she was very distressed because in her interpretation, my not voting for Hillary was a de facto endorsement of Trump.
Yeah.
And because she believed that Trump was going to, institute all the most horrible things on the planet you can imagine.
Yeah.
Therefore, I was. Yeah, more or less. And so I was effectively endorsing someone who was going to put her in danger, and therefore everything that we had been to one another as friends for the past decade was vetoed, canceled out completely. And and I tried to explain to her, I said, well, by that logic, I'm also endorsing Hillary Clinton by not voting for Trump.
Yeah.
But no, but nothing could be done about it. And she effectively dumped me over that, despite everything else that we'd been through together for 10 years. And that was the most individually dramatic example of it. There were other sort of, I guess, more passive examples that caused me to drift, or I guess my friends to drift away from me. This is the thing. I never, and to this day, I don't feel like anything about my perspective on the world or in general terms has changed all that much in the last, say, 10 years. But it sure feels like a whole bunch of people around me and the world itself has kept moving way off into la la land more and more. So I could be wrong. I mean, I'm my own worst witness, but that's what it's felt like.
Yeah. That's how I feel too. That's how a lot of people like, well, yeah, it was crazy around then. I remember, just not wanting to tell anyone that I wasn't going to vote for either person.
Mm-hmm.
And, I always was like, I'm just not going to ever talk about politics. But then it got to the point where it's like, well, like, especially in 2020, where like, that's when I really started, like looking up stuff about, like the left, craziness, like when they were like, oh, if you don't post a black square, then, the whole silence is violence thing.
Yes.
And then I looked up stuff about, like, I randomly saw videos about Evergreen College, like, I guess when that happened.
Yeah, if you ever want to see like I think what is the epitome of documentation on Evergreen State College, look up a YouTuber named Benjamin Boyce, if that wasn't in the first place, because he did a extensive, in detailed series over a couple of years looking at that, and he's still I think the primary expert on the whole thing. And for those of you out there listening that have no idea what happened at Evergreen State College, look it up first and foremost, but also, again, like I say, look up Benjamin Boyce on YouTube if you want to have a crash course into madness.
Yeah, I saw the one that was like a 4-part series. And I was like, it was weird because I heard of that Brett Weinstein guy talking about college, and I don't know, whenever it happened, I guess I was like, oh, he's making a big deal about these college kids. They're just college kids, And then now it's like, no, that that mentality is going into everything now.
Yeah, that's one of the. So I mean, I guess I started my channel. One of the things that I hope to promote through my channel is just thinking critically about what people are telling you. Whether you agree with me or not in my conclusions or anything else, just to think more critically about what's being said. I didn't necessarily start it to look at the social justice movement or all that stuff. It just became, I mean, it just became so obviously contradictory that if that's what I'm trying to promote, the critical thinking on things, and that's different than critical race theory. Anybody else that I'm talking actual critical thinking. So I only really started getting into the whole commentary stuff or watching it just before, in the months before the whole Gamergate thing happened, right?
Oh yeah.
And what started it was I'm not talking about Gamergate now, but just in general. One of the guys that I watched at the time was called the Internet Aristocrat, and he's now Mr. Metzger on YouTube. But he did a series back in 2014, I think it was, or around there, called Tumblrisms. And he'd do these little episodes where he'd go over some concept or some new buzzword or something from the depths of Tumblr. Yeah. And so that series was the first place I'd ever heard terms like otherkin or white privilege or thin privilege or headmates and all these other things that I was just taken aback by. And at the time, it really felt like, wow, this is at least because it was all Tumblr blogs, this is the rhetorical equivalent of a Jerry Springer episode. You know, it's just this really fringe Looney Tunes stuff. And that's kind of how I thought of it until, of course, I started hearing people in my real life start using those terms and making those arguments and that kind of thing. And that's when I knew this isn't fringe anymore. If it was, it certainly isn't anymore. If people that I've known for years are starting to say this stuff. And so, but yeah, that started, I started watching that stuff just before Gamergate happened. And I'm not going to do a history of Gamergate, and everybody has their opinions on it, but anybody who was watching what was going on in real time, so to speak, on Twitter and otherwise, and then seeing how the media was interpreting it or the narrative that they were pushing around certain people and events was such in stark contrast one to another. The reality versus the media cycle interpretation. And obviously, you know, everybody, I think, kind of knows the media isn't a trustworthy source these days and hasn't been. It's always wise to, you know, check your sources and all. Yeah. But to that point in my life, I don't think I'd ever seen something that I could independently watch happen because it was all taking place on Twitter and places where you could watch live as it went by, and then see how it was translated into a media story. And to see the distance between those two things, I think more than anything else inspired me to want to promote people to ask questions about what they're being told, and, you know, not to take everything on face value that's coming from someone that's in a position of authority. That's not to be inherently rebellious or anything, or just to, like, you know, oh, you know, can't trust anybody over 35 or whatever, but that you think about what's being said, and you do your best to make up your own mind based on what you know or what the other person is or isn't saying. So
yeah, I don't really know. I kind of vaguely know about Gamergate, but back then I guess I didn't know about all that stuff.
It's a very weird time. Yeah. I like I say, I wouldn't even attempt to try to give a rundown, but just as an example of the reality versus media narrative, it was a very educational event, I guess.
Yeah, I guess for like years, until like 2020, really, I kind of was like, oh, this stuff is crazy. Like, there's something going on. And I just couldn't really, I guess I kind of was like, maybe I'm missing something. And I just never completely looked into stuff. But is that when, did you start losing friends before you, or I mean, I don't know if you lost more than that one, but.
Oh, well, I mean, Yeah, I mean, if I had to put a line on it, I'd say around 2015, 2016 was the
Okay.
period in which, yeah, a lot of lines were drawn philosophically and ideologically between myself and my friends. Except I wasn't the one doing the line drawing. It was like I have a very brief example. I'll try to keep it brief as much as I can. And it's one of my last sort of Facebook adventures, let's say. So I'll try to distinguish here. So friend A, let's just say friend A posts a little story, and this was I think it was around, I don't remember which one because obviously there've been several now, but it was around the time of a protests over one of the police shootings. I don't remember which one, but that's kind of irrelevant for the story. Anyway, she posts a story how she went to the doctor to get a blood test, and blood was taken. And during the course of this, she and the nurse had a little bit of chit chat, and the nurse said something to the effect of, I don't understand all the craziness going on right now, all over a traffic ticket. And my friend, who had an idea of what was going on in the news, corrected her and said, it's not about a traffic ticket, it's about da 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 da. And then the nurse says something to the effect of, oh, well, whatever it is, I just hope it gets over with soon. And that was the story. Like, that was it. There was no commentary. There was no elaboration. It was just this sort of like very bare bones back and forth description of an exchange. And then friend B comes in and he responds to that. Again, there's nothing else in this story. There's nothing else about that. That's all there was. So friend B comes in and he gives this wall of text describing how the nurse's intentional ignorance over the circumstances of the protests shows her inherent racism, da, 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 da. And I looked at this, and this was still when I was in that, I guess, naive period where I thought someone could still ask a question. And I simply asked, what about what the nurse said was racist? And in response, there was another wall of text explaining in all these buzzwords and everything else that didn't even talk about or even quote. So if you could call that a quote, because it was just a story being told, what the nurse said. And so I asked again, I said, yeah, but how do you determine? Anyway, this went around for like maybe 2 more rounds of walls of text and me just looking like, I don't get how you reach that conclusion. And then friend C, and remember, all these people are people that I've known for, in most cases, more than 5 years at worst and up to 10 years at best, right? Wow. So friend C swoops in and who hadn't been a part of any of it to begin with, and lets me know that I couldn't quote it if I tried, but effectively said that my continual opposition is just evidence of my inherent agreement with the nurse. So basically, I'm a racist. And it was so bizarre. It was so bizarre that I could have this conversation with, like I said, these weren't strangers. These are people that I'd been hanging out with, that I, birthdays, gone through breakups, I mean, just for years and years, just all types of stuff. But it was almost as if I was talking to completely different people who I'd never met before. And likewise, that they were encountering me, who they had absolutely no idea of my character or of my history or my behavior otherwise. And that was more, next to my friend dumping me over Donald Trump. I guess in the ideological sense, that was the big event prior to YouTube that really showed me that this stuff, whatever this was, whatever this perspective that was taking over people's lives and minds, had gone so far as to end up in the people that I knew and trusted for years.
Were those people, like, did they go to college? How do you think they got like that? Do you think they went to college or
I honestly, I couldn't say for sure. And that experience is one of the things that kind of at the same time, and for as much as I don't understand or have a hard time comprehending the logic or the rationale of some of these arguments, it
Yeah.
also reminds me that um, inherently, I don't think most people who promote these ideas are somehow inherently bad or dumb or something else. Uh, it's one of those things, people rarely think of themselves as the villain, even if they're doing something that is possibly demonstrably bad. And I don't. Yeah, I couldn't say what the trigger was for each one individually. Say I have my suspicions for individual people, I suppose,
Yeah.
but in aggregate, I think it is a desire to either do good things and or be a good person, or they have been convinced one way or the other that this is the right way to behave and or interact with other people. That's as generic as I could say without being a mind reader. That's about it.
Yeah, I kind of think well, I don't know, I guess I go back and forth. Like I used to think, oh, it's just social media, and then
Mhm.
um like I don't know, it's like just the fact that they all say it's the right side of history like somehow convinces
Mhm.
them to but yeah, I used to I guess at first I was like what's like thought there was something wrong with those kind of people, but yeah, then I did eventually like yeah, I guess it's just something like human nature, like groupthink. It's just a natural part of.
Yeah. I mean, social media definitely has a big hand in it because it's especially Twitter and little things like that. It's such an instantaneous gratification to be able to put
Yeah.
out there. And also, I think part of the mechanism is that you only have so many words on a tweet to put on that you have to sort of simplify everything down to a brief statement. And that also contributes to a lack of nuance or a lack of room to maneuver just in discussing something.
Yeah.
And we've been so polarized on if you disagree with this, then you're on one side, or if you agree with this, then you're on the other side, and there's no in between. You can't both you know be a proponent of the Second Amendment and be for pro-choice. Like those two things could not mix together in the world that we're currently living in if somebody said that. And I've confused several people like in one instance in the same breath on Twitter one time on the same day someone called me a victim of Trump derangement syndrome, as in I was a crazy liberal, and someone else again on the same day classified me as a neocon, as a neoconservative, like the most far right, on the basis of I guess my opinions on different things, because if you can believe it, everybody is not a monolith on their thinking. And the idea that you're coming across someone with opinion X, and opinion X says everything you need to know about that person, and you can classify them as good or bad. Uh, well, I mean, if this is one of my pet peeves, if people actually look up the definition of the word bigotry, it has nothing to do with racism. It has everything to do with you're hating someone because of their opinions, except that being a bigot is now interchangeable with the word racist,
Yeah.
which, I mean, I can't cure that, but it's one of my pet peeves when people say, "Oh, you're a bigot," because someone said, or they think this is something racist. Is like, well, you can be both a bigot and a racist, but a bigot is not necessarily a racist, and vice versa. So
Yeah. I
anyway,
heard you say.
that's my English major pet peeve for the day.
Yeah, I heard you say that on a video, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I knew that or I forgot or something because everybody uses it
Yeah, I
that
know
way.
exactly, and like I say, it's one of those things where, and especially these days, it's not the most egregious example, but there is so much of an effort to redefine terms and redefine words to mean something else. Uh, like it just happened in my stream this morning, where the title of the stream, or the title of the presentation I was looking at, was police and prison abolition. Okay, so police and prison abolition. That's pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of room to maneuver there. And then by the time you get to about the middle or the end of the first lady's talk, she says something to the effect of, "Now we don't actually mean, taking away all prisons." I'm like, wait a second. And I'm like, you can't. Then don't say abolition.
Yeah.
The continual redefinition of what racism is. Like the Anti-Defamation League put out a brand new definition a few weeks ago after the whole Whoopi Goldberg thing. That basically, if you take that definition at its core, that means the Nazis weren't racist. It's so ridiculous, and so yeah, constantly redefining terms and trying to train people to think this word doesn't mean what it actually means, or this concept is opposite of what it is. That's something else that's I think people should be more aware of, is how their words and things are being manipulated to manipulate people. Of course, that's always been the case, but I think it's more egregious these days.
Yeah. I mean, they did that with the defund the police, and even Black Lives Matter, kind of, because I remember when that started coming out, I was like, it just was like a little odd to me, like that everybody was so against the All Lives Matter thing. Mm-hmm. And I guess I was like, well, I'm not going to fight for that or anything, but it was kind of odd. But yeah, I started to notice this in like stand-up comedy, just like the local.
Yeah.
I was in Philadelphia, and there was like a decent number of very political, like left leaning people, and yeah, I remember there was one girl comedian that kind of, like, she had a problem with some guy's set, like he was just talking about women or something, and like it wasn't even offensive, but she just kind of made a stink and then posted on this giant wall of text, on Facebook. And I think I just commented something like, that's not how it went down, or that's not what he meant, like something really short like that. And then she messaged me this huge thing. And yeah, but I didn't know her personally. That would have been I actually haven't had any friends that like change like that. So yeah,
comedy's taken a big hit over the last several years. I mean, obviously always you get a controversial comic who says something controversial. It's like, oh, it's a big controversy. Like anytime David Chappelle opens his mouth these days, it's like, oh my God, David Chappelle said this thing. And you're like, he's a comedian. I mean, first and foremost, freedom of speech. If it doesn't mean that, then I don't know what you're talking about. Two, he's a comedian, and him saying things about uncomfortable subjects in order to get a reaction out of people is what comedians, or at least good comedians, often do.
Yeah.
I did a video, if you can believe it, because I have a YouTube channel. A couple of years ago, it was a TED or TEDx talk, and it was a lady who said she was a comedian, and I put it that way because I'm not quite sure how funny she actually is, but the subject of her talk was the inherent wrongness of rape jokes.
Oh.
And as soon as I saw the title, I thought back to the old George Carlin bit where he he talks about, like, it's like, I think rape is hilarious, and he goes off on that. It's like, yeah, but I can't do the whole video here, and I'll give you a link if you want to it. I think it's still relevant today. Actually, I really, if I ever end up on Kurt Metzger's show again, I really want to show that one to him and see what he has to say. But yeah, no, she was going off on how, rape is such a serious thing and it's a terrible thing and people are joking about it. And I'm like, well, when should you joke about things? You know what? And now I am not a comedian. I'm not a professional comedian by any standard, but just in general, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, a lot of people find solace in joking about serious things in order to take the power away from that thing that they are scared of or makes them uncomfortable or whatever. it's not an invalid thing to do either for yourself or in general. Like if you can't joke about serious things, well, what is comedy for?
Yeah.
You know, if you can't make fun of the powers that be, the authorities in the world, or the things that we're supposed to be frightened of, well, what exactly is the point? And so that was one of those things where I'm just like, if this is, and that's something else that for anybody out there who doesn't know my channel, and I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, something I've leaned into quite a bit over the last couple of years is TedX, which is the sort of regional organized TED Talks, where just about anybody can have a stage to talk about anything. And kind of in the vein of Tumblr, where I thought what I was seeing on Tumblr was a fringe thing that'll never make it into the mainstream. Well, now I know better, of course.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, if there are ideas or proposals or anything that is currently on the fringe that may become mainstream in the future, I figure you're going to hear about it first, probably on something like TEDx, where you've got some local community college professor throwing out an idea or talking about a concept or some policy or whatever. And so I kind of see TEDx as a canary in the coal mine kind of thing. And that lady talking about, you can't make rape jokes. You can't talk about rape. Yeah. It's offensive, and it's this, that, and the other. And I thought at the time, I said, well, I'm sure this kind of thinking has been in comedy before, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be taken more seriously now after the whole Me Too thing. So
yeah, well, that's the whole gallows humor thing. Like people that work in like morgues or even hospitals, like my siblings do, when they talk.
Yeah.
About, and like it's kind of like it's really, I mean, just the whole free speech debate, like it is really ridiculous because I mean, really it should be a really short defense. Like, okay, it's just speech, you can be offended, but don't. The whole problem with this whole culture now is just trying to cancel people and end their whole livelihood. I mean, you can be upset, and that's really the whole defense of free speech. Like, look, sorry you're upset, but it's free speech, and that should be it. But it's like, yeah, but what if somebody, was sexually assaulted in the, and then they go through this whole like trying to make exceptions, and it's like,
yeah. When it comes to as the rule goes, offenses taken, never given. It's a choice on your part to become offended by something, and I mean, as we've seen, someone says something wrong, quote unquote wrong, and or something is said of them that is purported to be wrong, and that immediately makes them a villain. I think. Just the example of pops mind, so we're talking about comedy in the wake of the whole Me Too fervor. And I remember we were actually we were talking about it back when first the whole Harvey Weinstein thing broke, and he was being just like torn down. I said to my friends, if Harvey Weinstein can be taken down like this, no one in Hollywood is safe. It's one of those things where if you take a shot at the king and you hit, that means everybody's in danger. But there was that one story, maybe you remember it, of Aziz Ansari, where some lady after a date decided that she didn't like the outcome of the date. And so she categorized a whole bunch of stuff that in any other circumstance would just sound like normal date stuff. And suddenly he's now like perhaps some kind of sexual predator or something. And it's just like, that's the danger when you start, if anything anybody says without evidence now becomes the evidence. If a rumor or taking something someone says out of context, or taking something that someone says as literal truth about them or something else, and then it's like, oh, well, now that person needs to be removed. James Gunn had a tweet 10 years ago that made a lousy joke, and so now we have to fire him from his job at Marvel. No, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and well, that's like when the phrase like "believe all women" started to happen, and I was like,
yes, I mean, some of the like foundationary ideas of what makes a a more stable society have just been sort of tossed by the wayside in order to make somebody feel better. Like the presumption of innocence before being found guilty of something. The accusation is the evidence, the allegation is the crime, and so on. It's ridiculous on its face, but that's just how people operate this. And I think part of it is that you don't have to think too hard to figure out which side of the argument you're on if you intentionally decide you don't need the details. Like I said, it's this instant gratification, 240 character Twitter, Instagram society we have now, where I need to know right now what I'm supposed to think about this thing because I got 12 other apps I have to look at. And I think that takes away discussion. It takes away contemplation, critical thinking. And so that's the benefit of being able to do a little bit of what I do, where you can actually pause the video you're watching for a second, think about what the person said, compare it to what they said previously, think about whether it makes any sense for a second, and then move on, where everybody else is moving at a mile a minute these days.
Yeah. Like I kind of feel like humans need, like, it's like when because I've known, like, I mean, honestly, most people in the comedy, like, community that I've met are more like militant online, more opinionated like that. And then when you get them face to face, it's like, oh, they're like different. They're like reasonable.
Yes.
And it's weird. I feel like we kind of forgot, like, people kind of forgot our, like, the roots of just being a person, like, where we need face-to-face contact. Like, it's just too like, we just see, it's like, I mean, I've definitely, like, on social media, like, you'll see something and you do, like, I have gotten upset at things. Like, you see something where you're like, even if you just disagree, but it's like there's just something weird about just seeing text written down like that or something. And you know how they're probably designed to, like, boost, like, the algorithms and all that, just designed in a certain way to like elevate outrage or whatever. It's like we forgot our roots of just being a human being. Like, we're like, no, everything's different now. Like,
well, we're not interacting with human beings when we're going on Twitter, are we? I mean, mechanically speaking, if I see a tweet, right, and someone's giving their opinion, and then I imagine I'm tweeting back, who am I tweeting to? I'm tweeting to, ostensibly a person, but my idea of that person is based entirely on what I'm seeing on their profile or what they've said in their tweet. And so there's so much room for my imagination, or I should say, there's only so much room for my imagination to operate on who this person is. Because, ultimately, do I care about the individual? Do I care about their life and their problems or anything else? No, I care about this interaction with this comment or with this tweet or with this meme or whatever it is. And whether there's a person there is, an actual person, a person with complexities and a bigger life and a family, it's irrelevant. It's not a conversation. It's not a dialogue. It is, it's just comfort food. That's really all it is. It's just like little bursts of endorphins you're getting from getting into a Twitter fight, or being able to, gotcha on somebody else, or being able to express your opinion in 40 characters or whatever and sending it out. The art of understanding people or interacting with human beings has become less and less necessary. I mean, it's not so much as it's fallen out of fashion. It's because it's not necessary. I don't need to leave my apartment to live a life now, right? I can work from home. I can order food from home. I can communicate with people from home, either a Twitter or a live stream or a call or whatever. And I never have to see a human face again if I don't want to, short of a video I'm watching.
Yeah.
I think part of our problem is the fact that association is very quickly becoming obsolete. back when we had to go talk to somebody. Like, I don't know if you're old enough, because I can't tell how old you are because I'm terrible at that. But there was a time, for those of you out there who are listening, there was a time where you actually had to go to the library. You know, you actually had to go to a place outside of your house to go find information on things. And in the process, you would have to interact with other people, and you'd have to touch things, and you have to ask questions of other people. And in between here and the library, you might have to do a couple of other things. Yeah, these things are no longer necessary.
Yeah.
It's just, and so the more that we have fallen into this ultra connected information superhighway, as it used to be called, the less we actually have to operate amongst each other as people. So yeah, no, it's definitely, that's definitely a big part of it.
Yeah, that's why the whole new normal phrase was bothering me, you know, in the pandemic. And then the whole Meta company.
Yes, the metaverse.
And I remember when I was a kid, like I dreamed of virtual reality. I was like, "Whoa, that's the coolest thing ever!"
Yeah, Lawnmower Man. I mean, I watched Lawnmower Man, and like, gosh, for really old people, Captain Power and all these other things. We had like 3D monsters, and you had those. Yeah, no, it was a great novelty. Yeah, now we have metaverse.
Yeah, and it really is like, I mean, the more I mean, especially when lockdown was going on, the more like I was just sitting at home, not seeing it. It just is weird when then I did go out, and I was like not used to being around people. Like it makes you more like, I guess, fearful, and like, I don't know.
You fall out of practice, you know, and it's kind of like having to relearn riding a bike or something. Yeah, no, it does. And especially with being bombarded with social distancing, and everybody has to be aware of another. And also not just that, but even if you feel like you're on an even keel, suspecting that the person next to you might be more paranoid than you are by everything else going on.
Yeah.
And you sort of not wanting to disrespect that or even have to conflict with that, that also puts distance between you and other people in a passive way. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's already like, I mean, a lot of this, you know, woke stuff and all the, it's like everybody's assuming. I mean, because I read this book over lockdown, like the coddling of the something, forget that, but it just talks about how kids now grow up to like, in a certain, I guess parents were overprotective, and then the kids were more sensitive, and then it's like this whole pattern. But like a lot of the, even a lot of the TedXs, like they just talk about, like they talk like a lot of people now are, I mean, well, that book talks about like, you know, the guy went to therapy, and he did like C.B.T, and like and when you do that,
and for those of you at home, that's a cognitive behavioral therapy. You might also recognize those letters as cock and ball torture, but I'm assuming that it was cognitive behavioral therapy this guy was going to.
Well, I didn't know that, but
well, sorry to educate you, but the first time that I ever heard, little known fact, I was the president of the BDSM club in college. And the very first time I ever heard of the term C.B.T, that's what it was referring to, cock and ball torture. So the first time that I ever heard C.B.T referenced in mental health, my mind went into very strange places for a moment until somebody just told me what it was. I was like, oh, because I thought something completely different.
Wow. That guy should probably try C.B.T.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, you know, it's like, oh man, I'm having a fear of flying. You really should try C.B.T. What?
Wow. Yeah, but like that told, well, like because I have anxiety and stuff, so I've done some of that, and you basically, you know, like, you know, you have like thinking errors or something. There might be different names for it, but that's what it seems like a lot of these people, like they're encouraged to have those and do mind reading on other people. Like they assume they meant something offensive all the time.
Yeah. A lot of
generation.
Yeah, a lot of what fuels this stuff is categorizing people and giving easy to recognize definitions of what you should think about those people. Like,
Yeah.
boys are inherently toxic. Like, masculinity is toxic. So any boys misbehaving are showing signs that they're going to be terrible. Or, you have to. I hear things like this all the time. You have to understand that you have to help marginalized people who cannot speak for themselves. And I'm like, okay, so what you're telling me is that I have to look at anyone who falls into a particular demographic as being inherently disabled.
Yeah.
Right. That's how I have to look at the world, is that if I see someone that falls into this category, I am to make a prejudgment of their abilities or their life experiences or the condition of their character or whatever, without having to ask any questions. And there are obvious terms for that kind of thinking, but they never use them to describe what it is that they're advocating for. They tell us it's a good thing. That's the correct thing to do. I'm like, what? Yeah.
Yeah, that was we had a video last week, that lady that was talking about she hit rock bottom when she didn't get a photograph from Obama or whatever.
Man, I tell you, now just again, for anybody listening out there, I don't want to make it sound like all TEDx talks are terrible. There are some good TEDx talks out there, and sometimes I do pick ones to look at just because I think the title is going to tell me what I'm going to have happen. And sometimes I don't know what I'm going to get out of the title. But this one in particular, it was, God, what was the original title of that thing? Let me look it up real quick, because sometimes I know, sometimes I forget. Just as an example.
About being an ally or something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Here, it's something with the, hold on. It was called Your Journey to True Allyship. And for those of you that don't know what allyship means, and this is my cynical take on it, you can obviously look it up and examine for yourself, but allyship basically means you are someone who is going to obviously know that someone who is in a particular demographic needs your help. And you're going to be a good ally. You're going to see that someone, and it could be anything. Someone is LGBT, someone is Black, someone is a woman, whatever category. And you know that, yeah, exactly. So you know that they're going to need assistance because they cannot help themselves. So you need to be a good ally and give them your help because you know they need your help, because that's being a good ally.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
And the way she was talking, kind of like, that's like a whole thing I noticed with all this language. It's like, I mean, it's like religious sounding or like mystical, or like she was talking about, like, talk to the elders. And I was like, is this like a, it's just a real weird way that they talk, like
there is an element, and I've made this comparison before. There is a lot of faith-based elements to some of this ideology that had nothing to do with anything supernatural necessarily, but you have to first and foremost believe that, especially these days with the whole anti-racist movement, that everything is imbued with racism. Everything. All systems, all people. There is no such thing as being not racist. You're just either racist or you're confessing to your racism. That's it. The originals, your skin color determines your character. So to be white is inherently wrong or inherently flawed, or to be a boy is inherently flawed. So like original sin. You cannot get rid of what you've been branded with biologically, but this thing determines what people should think of you and your abilities, your character, and so on. And there, or the patriarchy, this overriding male-dominated system that will forever keep women down, and so on. There's a lot of faith necessary to believe in the things that are being pushed, and as well to justify in yourself how you're either looking at or treating others without having to ask whether or not you might be wrong.
Yeah. I mean the way like they describe allyship, and it's like treating people like they're handicapped or whatever. It reminds me of like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember this South Park where like all the parents leave or something and they become like Lord of the Flies, like
Mm.
and then like Stan's dad comes back and he like talks to them like they don't know English, and he's like, I'm your father or
Mm-hmm.
something like
Yeah.
that. That's kind of like what it's like,
Well, to be an ally is to be both supportive and subservient. You are not in a position to question the
Yeah.
the wisdom. Again, whatever it doesn't matter what demographic we're talking about. Whatever demographic that you're purporting to be an ally of, they have secret wisdom that you can't possess, and whatever they need, you need to be there to support them in that thing, because obviously they need that help, because the way that they are or what they are, etc., is a detriment to their ability to operate independently. That's again, this is the redefinition of terms. Being an ally, it doesn't
Yeah.
mean being a friend. This is the thing, and again, this is the thing that I've run up into a lot of times since I have heard the terms and how they're employed in these ideologies. When I say them, I know what they're being used for, but I also know what they should mean.
Yeah.
And the disconnect between those two things sometimes is hard to get across to me. So when I say allyship in real life, I know I mean like a friend, or
Yeah.
at the very least, if you want to be the most cynical about it, two parties who have a mutual interest, a mutual goal, even if they're not friends. You could,
Yeah.
you can be an ally with someone because
Oh
you
yeah.
both the same thing, but you're not necessarily friends. Okay, yeah, sure, that happens. But in this case, an ally is a helpful subservient. That's what that means in the sense when we're talking about it in the social justice territory.
Yeah, I mean, I remember starting to see that word all the time, and and there was, and I don't know if this was around Me Too or whatever was going on, but like there was this comic that some comic was like, yeah, I wear these wristbands now to show I'm an ally. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, at the time I was like, wait, so you're just like a good person? That's out. Like to me, that's all it means is you're just a regular, decent human being. Like, why do we have to display? Like a lot of like that one guy on that one video did that had a shirt that just said "not racist."
Oh Lord, yeah, that was a bit on the nose, and at the
Yeah.
time, I think even I said during the show, I said, okay, maybe this is some kind of elaborate work of performance art,
Oh yeah.
because it was just
Yeah.
it just I think I said that, but either way, it was just so like a living satire of what the most guilt-ridden white person would do, is to wear a shirt that says "not racist." It's
Yeah.
like, and that's the other thing too. Is a lot of times you can't tell whether someone is joking or if they're serious, because
Yeah.
the seriousness, quote unquote, has gotten so comically extreme that you'd be forgiven if you thought someone was doing a parody, and that's also part of the issue too.
Yeah. That's kind of like me and my friend. Like we went to this college. I mean, this was probably 2006, 2007. But so this wasn't, I guess, really, I wasn't really noticing a lot of it, but there were these shirts on campus that people started to wear that just said, gay, fine by me.
Yeah, and
And
there's a lot. Yeah,
we were like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, it was just weird that we just started to see people wearing them. Like, there's a thing now where people have to show, like, yeah, I'm not a piece of shit.
yeah, there's a lot of push towards very blatant virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Like you and like I don't need to, like we were talking about earlier, I don't need to engage you individually as a person to know what you think. or you have to let everybody know that you're not a bad person, because otherwise, if you don't say this, they might think that you're, on the wrong side of history or whatever.
Yeah.
This is also one of the reasons why I don't, and just as a preamble, I'm not saying people who do this are inherently, shallow or anything, but I just don't find the usefulness in it, in like putting the flavor of the week flag or symbol on your Twitter profile so that every time you make a tweet, you show what you're for or what you're against or anything else.
Yeah.
It's a small thing, but I would ultimately rather someone ask me what I think on a subject instead of thinking that putting up one little symbol says everything that needs to be said, because that just that adds into and lends itself to that sort of instantaneous, instant gratification. I don't have to think too hard um, uh, narrative we're all falling into these days.
Yeah. I mean, well, years ago, like, yeah, people started to do that with gay pride and everything else, and but then, yeah, like 2020, that black square was like, okay, if you don't do this, you're a racist. And then
Right.
I was like, well, what about people that don't have social media? And also, like, my company, people were like posting on our like internal website or whatever. They were like, when are we gonna like post something? They kept like kind of getting upset about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is happening? Like,
Well, it's become the standard now. You have to
yeah,
make your declaration. Oh, excuse me. Swallowed wrong. You have to make your declaration. You can't leave any room for doubt as to the rightness of your thinking.
yeah,
There can be no nuance. There can be no discussion. It's just that I am for thing. Thing
yeah,
has happened. I am told to show that I believe in thing. I believe in thing. Now leave me alone. That kind of thing.
yeah,
It doesn't. They keep talking about we need to keep having these conversations. Except that most of the time they don't. There's no conversation to be had. Either you agree or you disagree. And if you disagree, you're on the wrong side, and that's all there is to it. And putting up the black square or the pride flag or the Ukrainian flag in the current events,
yeah,
all of these things tell everybody everything they need to know to avoid anyone thinking that you might be thinking incorrectly. Yeah.
yeah. You just have to do the work.
Mhm.
And
Okay, now you said that intentionally, didn't you?
yeah,
Yeah. Again, for anybody out there, there's an almost religious reverence to the phrase "the work" that I've noticed over the last several years, where
yeah,
to do this work, to do this hard work, or we have to, it's hard work. And in any other context, the word is not all that significant, right? Like allyship, you say it in one thing in the normal world, you can understand what it means, but in certain contexts, it is a labor of almost martyrdom when it is used in the context of pick your ideology lately, that feminism, anti-racism, any of that stuff where someone wants you to know that they are really sacrificing their time and energy. It's like, it's hard work. We have to do this work. The work requires us to, etc. So that's, again, it all depends on context. It all depends on the person saying it. Words do not necessarily mean what you think they do. And it's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, and they say like, oh, we have to have these difficult conversations, but then there really is, like you said, there's no conversation. You just have to agree. And
yeah, I always, at some point in my life, I would love to, I want to be having a difficult conversation with one of the people who uses that phrase to describe whatever obstacles they mean to imply, because I don't know what a difficult conversation looks. I can imagine that's part of the thing, is that a lot of the times people will say things and describe things in abstracts and almost never, and I mean, you hear me complain about this on my shows oftentimes, never give an active example of what they're talking about.
no,
And give me some idea of what I'm supposed to, like in my real life, this happened. And then I could say, okay, well, now I could at least evaluate what you're saying in a real world term. Otherwise, if you're just going to be abstract about it. So yeah, difficult conversation. We have to have these hard conversations. And all I imagine these hard conversations being is just someone comes in a room, for example, and says, all men are toxic. And that's it. And you listen to what I have to say and you don't argue back. You have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. So when I walk in the room and I pass judgment on you because of your skin color or your genitalia or your political leanings or whatever, the difficult conversation is you have to listen to my lecture. It's not about an exchange. It's not about a meeting of the minds or coming to an understanding. It's about saying the truth of the matter and not taking anyone saying elsewise, or telling them that they're terrible if they don't agree. That's all. That's all I. And again, I have to imagine that that's what it is because I'm not giving any information. Yeah. And given the temperament and the rhetoric from most of the people that use that phrase, that's all I've got in my mind.
Yeah. Do you mind if I just go to the bathroom real quick?
If I did, would you not? Go ahead.
Well, I'm just want to respect your.
No, go ahead. That's fine. I'll be here.
Okay. Make sure you do the work in the meantime.
Yes, I will do the work.
Yeah, like I was kind of thinking like when they talk about like there's going to be difficult conversations and like I saw one thing that was like maybe a podcast or something called like uncomfortable conversations with a black man or something. And it almost reminds me of like I don't know, like Nexium or something, where they're like, just ignore all your like intuition about that this probably is a bad thing, or this is just something wrong with it.
There is a lot of you wouldn't be wrong in comparing a lot of what happens with sort of cultish mentality, because and the biggest red flag to that, and not necessarily just cults, but just in general, is when a organization or a movement or anything else encourages you to separate out people who disagree as inherently wrong or bad for you. Yeah. That's one of the first and primary tools that, and I've done a lot of reading on cults and things, and there's a lot of inside jokes with my audience about Jim Jones and things like that. But you look at that with Scientology, where someone is a suppressive person, or when people work to encourage you to separate yourself from other people who don't agree with the party line and to become effectively an active bigot. Again, I'm using the word bigot in its definition, where someone's opinion inherently makes them a bad person. And so to further isolate you, both, quasi-physically, but certainly ideologically, away from any other opinions, any other viewpoints, any other people, that's when you, at least I hope most people, not everybody, but most people should get an inkling that something's not necessarily healthy here, because, creating your own echo chamber sounds about as beneficial as it sounds. And the primary thing, if there's one thing I wish I could encourage everyone on the planet to do, is to allow for the possibility that you might be wrong. I mean, not second guess every second of your day or everything that you do, but just allow for the possibility. And that's a lot of, I am asked at least once, I mean, oftentimes, but several times a month, let's say, somebody always asks, why do you put yourself through watching those TedXs, or why do you put yourself through watching those presentations when it's all gobbledygook or it's all inane? And you might think I'm a masochist in some way, shape, or form, but and you might not believe me when I say it, but I actually do watch these things because I don't want to trust that I know everything about a particular subject, and that I can take it on faith that hearing about something from one person is the end all be all on the subject. I like I like the idea that maybe by watching someone talk about a subject I think I know something about, that I could either A, learn something I didn't know, which is always possible, or hear an argument from a direction I hadn't heard before, which is always informative. And possibly, it's slim, there's a slim chance, but possibly I could have my mind changed on something, not necessarily 180 degrees, but maybe like with the one I did today as an example, restorative justice, just as a subject, a sort of a high level subject. For those of you that don't know what restorative justice is, this in general, it's the sense that you can find a way other than direct punishment to treat crime in society. If I had to make it very simple, and I am ridiculously simplifying it, it is at its base the talk it out, shake hands, and part as friends methodology of criminal justice, let's say. And again, I am simplifying it. Either way, I have listened to dozens of presentations and arguments for restorative justice or the abolition of prisons and police and so on from multiple people over the years. And it's always fascinated me because I never know what they're going to say next. And I keep waiting to hear, and there have been good arguments. There have been people that said, we shouldn't, we should have alternatives to jail for people who are simply battling drug addiction. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I have heard of those things. I've heard of diversionary programs. I've heard of drug court. I'm not against the idea. Okay, maybe that's a sound argument. Could that idea be applied to other kinds of crimes? Maybe. I don't know. Give me your argument. Tell me. Can restorative justice as a concept work in schools? Like, well, when you're dealing with kids who are still growing up and their minds and their perspectives on the world are still developing, yeah, sure. I mean, it depends on what the situation is, but yeah, you have two kids in a fight. Is it better to send the one kid to jail for assault, or should you just say, okay, let's talk this out? Would that be a better alternative? And maybe so, But then there you have people who say abolish prisons.
Yeah.
And this is an aspect of restorative justice. And then all of a sudden I have a lot of questions. What do you do with the serial killer? What do you do with the Bernie Madoff? The next Bernie Madoff. Abolish police. Okay. Who will find the serial killer? Who will detect the next Bernie Madoff? And what will you do with them? And those kind of questions. And so every time I watch one of these things, I'm thinking to myself, maybe this is the one. It's sort of like the rule of insanity, right? You do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Maybe this time someone will have a proposal for something that I can get on board with, or they will describe something that's only been alluded to before in a way that I have a better understanding of the argument, even if I don't agree with it. Being able to entertain an argument without necessarily agreeing with it is also something that people need to learn to do, and not just say, oh, that person I think has bad opinions, I'm never going to listen to what they have to say. Like Rachel Maddow is a liberal nutcase, and I'm never going to listen to what she has to say. Or Tucker Carlson is a right-wing nut job, and everything he says is poison. Well, if you're not even going to bother, or like somehow, someone who listens to Tucker Carlson, they themselves are now a bad person.
Yeah.
Just because I listen to what somebody says does not, it's the guilt by association thing. So if I go to a college campus and Ben Shapiro is speaking, right? Or I don't know or Kamala Harris is speaking. If I sit down and listen to what they have to say, their words do not somehow then infect my soul or alter my character through their sound waves or something. I could conceivably go listen to something Ben Shapiro has to say, walk out and go, I think he's full of garbage, and go on with my day, and that'd be it. And it wouldn't say anything about my character. It could be just, I didn't agree with what he had to say. So.
Yeah, I mean, like around 2020 also my my work just had like a they have like a webinar series, and one of them had like Jocko Willink on, and like for some reason that caused a lot of people to be
I don't know who that
outraged.
is. Who's that?
Oh, really?
Or maybe I've heard the name. I just don't recall.
He's like an ex-Navy SEAL. He's been on Joe Rogan, and he like
Oh,
has
okay.
books about how to have teamwork because I guess it's experience with the army and everything.
Okay.
Um, but for some reason, people were like, "Oh, he's too like aggressive, and he's been
Mm,
associated with like Ben Shapiro and stuff like that." And even Joe Rogan, they were like almost wanting to like they were trying to stop having him even go on.
sure. Right.
And I mean,
Yeah. Deplatforming people. It's like that person
yeah,
is going to say something I don't want to hear. They shouldn't even have the opportunity to speak.
yeah, the
Yeah.
whole thing with like people being associate like okay, so if someone just like goes on Rogan, they are now like whatever Rogan is.
Oh yeah. Hey, that person goes on Fox News all the time.
Yeah,
But then they never turn around and say, well, what does that say about anybody who only goes on MSNBC?
yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
that's the
if you, yeah,
Right Side History channel. So
yeah, right. It's just again, it's this very binary thinking of there's the right side and there's the wrong side, and if you're on the other side on anything, you're a terrible person. There's no nuance. There's no opportunity for discussion. If I know your opinion on this subject, then I know everything about you I need to know. It's ridiculous.
yeah, I mean, you do a good job of. I think Kurt Metzger mentioned this maybe that you're not like mean. You don't rail on like these SJWs or whatever. So you do
Yeah.
like kind of, but that actually makes it funnier to me because you're just a guy that's like, all right, I'm gonna try to listen to this.
Well, I mean, so what the and I don't usually say this explicitly or anything, but the way I've always come about these things, or just life in general, is you argue the point and not the person.
Yeah,
Uh, Almost, I mean, I don't have any statistics for this or anything, but almost never do I ever address anything about the person or the person themselves in any way, unless they make themselves part of their argument. Then I think it's
yeah,
fair game. But otherwise, I am there to hear the idea and to evaluate what they're saying, how they present it, and so on. I mean, you could put on a presentation of something that I actually agree with, but do it badly, and I'd still have something to say. But I won't like, what they're wearing doesn't matter, or my initial assumption about who they are, what they have to say, doesn't necessarily matter. I'll often at the beginning, and just again for people out there, I don't watch the videos I look at ahead of time, so I don't have any idea what they're going to say. I will oftentimes before a video starts, I'll say, okay, the subject of this presentation is said to be this. This is my baseline understanding of this thing. So
yeah,
this is where I'm coming from before we even begin. So if it's restorative justice or thin privilege or on immigration matters or something, I'll say, okay, this is where I'm coming from. Let's see what this person has to say. And that's it. And yeah, I don't, I mean, I might have my suspicions based on the title of something about where this person might fall ideologically or politically. But that's irrelevant to me because all I'm going to be looking at is this one thing this person has to say.
yeah,
On any other subject, I might be in complete agreement with them or completely disagree with them. It's irrelevant. I'm only looking at this presentation at this moment. And yeah, I think it's healthy to, as much as you can, remove your prejudgments, take people on individually one at a time, not assume you're necessarily going to know what someone's going to say just because, they wear it. Even if somebody wears a t-shirt that says not racist, right?
yeah,
I mean, if I saw that guy walking down the street, my first inclination would be to think this guy is joking. This guy's doing a satire.
yeah,
But after seeing that guy on that TEDx stage now, right, there's a seed of doubt in my head of like, oh, and that's really what I ultimately want to do for myself. This is the secret I never tell anybody on my channel, is that I'm only really doing this for me, in the sense that I don't trust that I know everything about everything. I don't trust that, like I said before, I want to encourage in myself the thought that I could be wrong on something. I don't want to assume that I know everything on a subject just because I heard it from one guy one time. And so shows like the ones that I do and the videos that I've made in the past, they are my attempt to force myself to keep an open mind. Well, I mean, it can be torture. It can be like that lady in the most recent one, listening to, I mean, and now for those of you that haven't seen it, by all means, go watch it if you really want to. But, TEDx talks can go a whole bunch of different directions. That's the great thing about TEDx. I really do want to promote the platform, because TEDx as a platform is amazing. There are any subject you can think of, anything you're interested in, there is a TEDx talk about it. Good, bad, or otherwise, it's out there. And that's why I love TEDx. It is the Tumblr of stage talks. It really is. And so you never know what you're going to get when you watch a TEDx. And so sometimes you get something that's actually informative and or thoughtful or whatever, it's fine. Sometimes that stage becomes the speaker acting out their own mind. And that lady had an ego the size of Sheboygan. I tell you what. And again, I can only estimate based on what I saw in that presentation. It is a snapshot of what that person had to say at that time. In any other context, I might get along great with that lady, but in that presentation, man, she was the center of all universes, and anything that went sideways for her was the greatest catastrophe on the planet. I wasn't allowed to take a picture of Barack Obama with my cell phone camera. That was such an experience of tokenism and racism and microaggressions. It just stained my entire career. Like, and for those of you listening, you might think I'm exaggerating. I mean, I'm being a little melodramatic, but no, I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But but that was just that one lady. And so now, so I say, okay, well, does that mean that any other event planner I come across thinks that way? No, that's just that one lady. I'm looking at this one lady interpreting the world and what she has to say. Will she have an interesting perspective on it? Maybe. Or maybe she's just going to ramble off a whole bunch of nonsense for 20 minutes. And this will just give me an example of, either to myself or to other people out there, is that just because somebody says something that sounds like a thing, like allyship, you really have to listen to what they are saying. You can't just go by the buzzword. What's behind it? What is the argument? Does it make sense? Is what they said at the beginning of the argument line up with what they said at the end? Critical thinking, even if you don't agree. And this is the thing, I don't want the audience, whoever watches my stuff, to just come and say, oh, you have to agree with me. I could be wrong. I have been wrong. I don't know everything about everything, but that's why I want people to listen for themselves.
Well, that makes one of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I swear I'm not infallible, but everybody else is.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking, like, all the ones I've listened to that you've done, I was like, it's like no one reviews any of them. Like, I feel like there should be maybe like a review session after somebody submits one of these.
No, I think so. No, I disagree. I love the fact that these things are no holds barred. I love, because here's the thing with, and this is my understanding. It might be different in different organizations, but with the TEDx process, what it is, at least the last time I looked it up, is that each little regional thing will have their own little message board or whatever. And the people, and then they're going to hold an event. We're going to hold a TEDx event on this subject or on this theme. And then, you have 7 or 8, 20 people, whatever, submit what is effectively a script of their presentation. And then the community of that regional whatever, or the people in charge of it, vote on which ones they want to have come on stage. And those are the ones that come on stage. I am all for the unfiltered nature of it, because you're hearing what real people in society who either comport themselves to be authorities on things or whatever have to say on subjects. This is what they actually think. This is what they're actually promoting. And I wouldn't police anything they have to say if my life depended on it. If they have an internal review process to make sure of time or whatever, that's on them. But as far as the actual content is concerned, or the quality of the argument or something, no, just go out there, let it all hang out. I want to hear what people really think. And I want that, because what is being said on the quote unquote fringes, on community colleges and small businesses, in business consultants and things, these are the arguments and the ideas that you're not hearing on the news, right? Because somebody who's a consultant for a business, you're never going to see them do their presentation to the business. You're never going to see the kind of stuff that's being pushed behind closed doors. You don't know what's going on in community college X off in Podunk, Ohio or something. But that's where these ideas start. That's where they get promoted behind the scenes. And by the time you've heard about it on the news, I mean, it's been going on for years.
Yeah.
So yeah, not to go too, I'm not trying to be too strident against you or anything, but no, I love TedX as it is. It don't edit, don't filter. I want to hear what people actually think about things.
Yeah. Well, and you also might be masochistic because you did say you were the president of the BDSM club or something.
Excuse me. Pardon me. Okay. There are two sides to a power exchange. There's the sub and there's the dom. The dom does the inflicting. The sub does the taking. So no, I am in fact not a masochist in that sense. But that's a whole other subject. As far as being a masochist mentally, maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit in the sense that and you'll see this on the shows, I get a lot of entertainment for myself out of listening to what I don't always know what someone is going to say in these presentations, but when they say something that is so mind-bendingly bizarre, I just laugh. You know, I laugh out of frustration. I laugh out of bewilderment. But whatever the cause, whatever the trigger, it's laughter. And I know I don't have enough of that in my life. And so if that's masochism, well, then I guess in that sense, in that context, I'm a masochist.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, actually. I mean, it's good to have, I mean, there was one you did that wasn't a TEDx, that was like queering your therapy or something.
Oh yeah, Doctor. I'm gonna promote somebody here. So I don't usually look at the same individual more than say once, but back in the olden days of my channel, I came across a guy named Chris Hoff, Dr. Chris Hoff. Oh. He's a family therapist, and he calls himself the radical therapist. And I just, and again, I want on the far off chance anybody who knows who he is or he himself ever hears this, I have a lot of love and respect for Chris Hoff. Okay, I really do. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that he says or promotes, but that's beside the point. I think the guy is a very gentle, well-meaning individual. And I just happen to, on certain subjects, disagree with him. But he's one of the few people who I've come back again and again over time to look at, because just like sort of like with TedX, he's one of the few people who works in the mental health arena that I don't know how it's, but I feel comfortable listening to him. And mental health, now this is an area that a lot of people don't talk about too much. They'll talk about schools, they'll talk about in workplaces and so on. The kind of thinking that we're talking about as it is being applied to people's mental health by mental health professionals is something that I don't think gets enough attention. I know I probably don't pay attention to it as much as I should, but the times in the last couple of years that I've seen, either from his podcast or otherwise, something about mental health and fill in the blank, like anti-racism and mental health, queering your mental health practices. And I'm just like, what could this possibly be? And again, it's like absolute curiosity. Like, I have no idea, because I've been in therapy, right? A lot of people have been in therapy. I had a problem, or I wanted to know if I had a problem. I go to a person, I sit down, they ask me some questions, I say some things, we go back and forth, assess, evaluate, that kind of thing. And if there's something to be done, you do it. Okay. So it's supposed to be a very sort of beneficial thing. And unfortunately for me, I didn't have this happen in my therapy deal, but I can only imagine someone who is a therapist who has an ideological agenda who is then taking on patients.
Yeah.
That
Been
is
hearing
just,
about that lately.
yeah, and it's just, it's frightening to me, honestly. It really is. And so when somebody says, I have to apply, I have to queer my therapy practices. I have no idea what that means. I'm like, literally, what does that look like? If a guy walks into your office and says, I have a fear of flying, what does it mean to approach this person through a queer lens? And by contrast, what would a non-queer lens therapist say? And that's something that I think it would happen in that very stream. I kept waiting for examples. I always ask for active examples because you just saying something doesn't tell me anything. You have to tell me, what does a therapist do who's not applying this lens as compared to someone who does? I need to have some ability to be able to contrast, to understand, because I really do want to understand. Even if I think it's absolute snake oil, I want to know what the argument is. And the lady never gave anything. But mental, I really should, on a more regular basis, try to find examples of how some of this stuff or is being proposed in mental health. Because that's an area that, like I say, a lot of people don't really talk about, isn't mentioned all that much, but it seems to be one of the more scarier ones if you're counseling someone through an ideological prism, first and foremost, before you even get to what their problem is, right? Because in my mind, a therapist, ideally, and I understand that there's no ideal, but ideally should be a relatively neutral party when it comes to listening to what you have to say as it applies to your life and your sensibilities, and then trying to give good advice and healthy advice on how to handle those things, not through an ideological lens, although obviously different schools of philosophy, of psychology could be considered ideologies, but certainly not through a political lens or a sociological lens necessarily. But anyway, that's stuff that's happening, and it's kind of goofy.
Yeah, I mean, that might be my favorite video I've heard of yours, because it's just
really
like,
okay. Well, thank you.
It's just like the funniest, because you just keep going, all right, she's gonna answer, and then she goes off into like,
I know it's always this like fake out. It's like you think it's like they start talking about something, and they've been talking in abstracts for the last 5 minutes, and then the person interviewing them or whatever says, okay, well, can you give us an example of that? I'm like, okay. I'm like, here's the time. Here's it coming. It's coming. It's coming. Now's the time. Okay, I am ready. I am ready to be educated. I've been waiting for this for, whatever, 7-8 minutes or whatever. Lay it on me. And then they go right back into abstracts or give you a hypothetical, which doesn't mean anything. And I was like, for crying out loud.
And that actually was that is kind of scary to me to hear. And I don't know, I was almost like, I mean, maybe she's a person that just like talks too flowery, or like just, I don't know. Like you would hope that maybe she's not a good interviewer, or, I mean, guest, or like.
Yeah, and that's really the thing, is like when you have someone who, and again, this is one of the things I try to promote on my channel. Just because someone has a credential, doesn't say anything about what they do or what they have to say. She's a board certified family therapist or what. I'm making that up. I don't remember what her credentials were, but it's something like that. Somebody comes out on a stage and says, I'm a board certified XYZ PDQ. I have a PhD in blah. I'm a doctor of X. That is, maybe that is a foot in the door for listening to what they have to say at best. It shouldn't be okay, this person knows what they're talking about, because you have to listen to what they have to say. And that lady, I mean, I think I even said this on the show, you'd think two people talking between each other who are both professionals in the same field just constantly use abstracts and talk in big words and sound so much sophistry. Sure, if they're talking shop, they're probably going to use terms casually that you and I have no idea what it means. And maybe that's as far as it'll go. But when even the interviewer, even Dr. Hoff was like, how many times did he try to ask her for an example or clarification? And every time, he's trying to be polite, he's trying to be nice, and he says, yeah, you make a great point. And I'm like, what point? No point was made. She didn't say anything. Like, really? Are you really going to let that go? I mean, I guess you have to because you're trying to be nice. But man, this lady like counsels people professionally, and if you care about your discipline, you would want her to be able to give you a specific example of something, right? You wouldn't let this pass, right? And that's always the sort of scary and sort of cynically funny thing about some of these deals is just that you can say a whole bunch of gobbledygook, and as long as it kind of sounds right, people will let you pass, or they'll be so intimidated to try to engage you, or maybe they're just aware they're not going to get anything out of it, that they just move on to the next question, and you just saved yourself from having to be interrogated.
Yeah, and I think maybe, I mean, a lot of people that are like, I guess, might agree with her on everything, will give her the benefit of that and be like, I don't know, I guess she's so smart, I don't know what she meant, but like
yeah, and that's one of the dangers. It's a lot of sophistry, a lot of things that sound smart that if you actually think about them for a second doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And that's, like I say, that's what I want to at least in some way warn people to watch out for, is just because somebody sounds smart, you have to really pay attention to what are they saying, and not just the feeling you get from hearing what they have to say.
Yeah, and I don't know if, like, I guess I was like, is that like, did she have a degree in like queer therapy? Because that does sound like a made up, just.
Well, I mean, like,
I'm
I could be wrong, but I think during the course of it, I was like, okay, I mean, if she means like there is a particular way you have to approach people whose sexuality is whatever, right? Okay, it's like you can't, like, if you're counseling two people in a relationship that is a same-sex relationship, there are certain considerations you have to make that don't necessarily apply to a heterosexual relationship. Now, if she'd said something like that, now I wouldn't know whether that's true or not, but that would sound more reasonable of an argument to me than you have to put everything through a queer lens, which means you look at it through not the regular normal thing. And this can also apply to without actually giving us anything. So I mean, like, let's say when I see a statement like that, or I see a term like that, my imagination could come up with something that might sound quasi reasonable, but it's not until I hear the person who says that they're the expert at it that I have any idea of what it is. And like I say, as Han Solo said, I can imagine quite a bit. That doesn't necessarily mean it's true, or that it's accurate to what somebody else is selling. And that's really where a lot of my curiosity comes from too.
Yeah, it was like she was like, that's what I thought at first too. Oh, I guess it's like about, although I guess, I mean, personally, I think the term queer now is just way too broad of a category, because it sounds like anybody that's ever had any kind of like, I might not be straight, I don't know, I never thought about it, I guess I'm queer, like.
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, the most common meaning of the word was just something that was off, something that was like something queer is going on, as in something is weird, something's off here. And then of course that got lots of words have several different meanings depending on the context, and so that one became one for describing homosexual relationships or homosexuality. And I never really had a problem with it. Context clues, I understood what somebody said when they said it, but that applying to a feeling you get because you're walking down in a dark alley versus describing a relationship that is, I mean, and statistically speaking, yes, compared to the majority of people on the planet who are heterosexual, not being heterosexual is quote unquote weird, as in it's off, it's not normal. And for anybody listening out there, that's not me saying people that are gay are deficient or something. It's just statistically speaking. But then to say, okay, now we're going to apply this to my therapy practices. like, what?
Yeah.
And she even said in there, she gave the two definitions. She described like how the word had
Yeah.
evolved into this, that, and the other. And I'm like, okay, so but what does that have to do with, counseling someone in a crisis? Like what? Again, and I don't want to try to recreate the entire thing, but she, as far as I can recall, she never actually tells us how it's supposed to work. She just talks a bunch of words.
Yeah.
So
Like I wonder how, like if he was just like well, okay, say you have someone come in and sit down, what makes your, oh, I think he did ask like what it makes it different from regular therapy.
yeah, he asked some decent questions to start off with. He was very polite, and like, as you listen to it, you can basically hear him trying to ask the same question two or three times because she didn't give an answer. But yeah, I'm assuming again that it's something that he hadn't heard much about before, and so he really wanted to learn something. He wanted to know, like, okay, what somebody who actually does this, what does it mean? And so yeah, he's just looking to understand just as much as anybody else, except that he's so nice a guy that he's not willing to hold her feet to the fire and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I really think that whether it's Dr. Hoff or anybody else that's questioning someone about their mental health practices, that you don't come, especially given the importance of this uh, to people's well-being, you don't approach, when you really want to understand what someone has to say about it, you don't approach it from a completely friendly direction. You have to be slightly adversarial. You have to challenge them.
Yeah.
Because if it's something that you've never heard of before and you're using this to try to counsel people through mental health crisis, and you yourself are a professional in mental health, like I say, I would hope that your standards for interrogation and understanding of practices is high enough that you would want someone to really answer a question, not get away with just rhetoric.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't like experienced any ideological therapists or anything, but it is scary to think that, oh, well, I've heard Deborah So, she writes about gender and basically goes against the whole like gender as a spectrum thing, and she
Mm-hmm.
talks about how therapy is all woke now and it's all like, so that is scary that like, you might not be able to find, I guess it depends. I don't know. It is scary to think that like most therapists would be like that. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's uh, the idea that you're going to be sort of in your most vulnerable state where you're looking for help and you're looking to fix something that is disrupting your life, whatever that is, and you go to somebody and they're, before you even walk in the room, their intention is to condition you towards a particular way of thinking about the world and society, et cetera, and their place in it and so on. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's again, it kind of goes back to that whole cult thing. It's much easier to indoctrinate someone into a particular ideology when they are vulnerable, when they're looking for help or they're looking for meaning or they're looking for understanding. And if you hold out your hand and you promise that you have those answers, you've got a far better chance of bringing in a new recruit than you would otherwise. And that's, I think, yeah, mental health is mental health and elementary school. Those are the two
Oh yeah.
areas where this stuff is, I think, the most concerning.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I've heard certain terms where I'm like, that's like one of those. Like I've heard lived experience
Mm-hmm.
using therapy. Like the guy said, I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll. You just hope that you're not being judged. Like, okay, well, as a white man, and then they start to judge you based on that because then everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, again, it's like you're encouraged to assume things about people on the basis of their genitals, their skin color, their opinion on one thing or another, and yeah, it's in the worst senses, it's promoting the very things that they would say that they're against. I'm against racism. That's why you have to look at race as an identity. Except that if you look at, if race is an identity all by itself, then the person is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like if I can look at somebody and I'm supposed to know something about them as a person on the basis of what they look like. If gender is an identity, if sexuality is an identity, if race is an identity, well, there's no need to know the person, the actual individual. It's all this sort of categorizing people and telling, like when you see people like I bring all my identities into the classroom or something like, well, okay, do you have a name?
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be the identity that I'm interacting with? I'm not interacting with your skin color. I'm not interacting with, unless we're really good friends, I'm not interacting with your genitals. So what? Yeah,
Unless we're
that's
doing
a.
CBT.
Plus, we're doing CBT. Don't mind the CBT. Uh, there was a book I read. Maybe you heard me tell this story. I don't know, but there was a book I read way back in the olden days of the '90s, and it was a book called The Gathering Storm, and it was written by a couple of guys from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it was in response partially to the Oklahoma City bombing, and it was talking a lot about and warning about the militia movement and the dangers thereof, the same movement and offshoots of it that Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols and those guys were involved in. And one of the things that it talked about in there was how the militia movement, or a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, had been overtaken by the new white identity movement. This was the rebranding effectively of the KKK back in the 80s and the 90s to try to become more palatable. They didn't call themselves the KKK anymore. They were the white identity or the Christian identity movement, depending on which area of the world you're in. And this book, where I read about how, these organizations were changing the definition of white supremacy to white identity to try to soften it, to try to make it sound more marketable. Where I learned a lot about, at least in this one segment of the world, what was going on. And so I grew up from the 90s up until, the last 10, 12 years or so, thinking that racial identitarianism is bad. If you whittle people down to their common denominator of race and make assumptions about their value, that is bad. It doesn't sound like it should be a very hard sell in this day and age, right? And yet, what do we hear all the time now? Black identity, racial identity, gender identity, et cetera, et cetera. And just like, this is just a rebranding of a very, very old and bad philosophy of ignoring the individual, classifying the demographic, and making assumptions about the quality or value of people on the basis of things that have nothing to do with their character. It's being branded as some kind of new thing or some kind of virtuous way of going about things in the world, but it's not. It really isn't. And it boggles me every time I see a grown adult who are really, ideally, I think we should know better, start promoting this stuff as though it were good without realizing exactly what it is that they're asking for.
Yeah, I started to notice I feel like feminism used to be a bigger, maybe around Me Too but I started to notice at least in comedy, every single female comic would talk about it. So I'm a feminist, but then a lot of them would say so I don't know if I'm a good feminist or I'm a bad feminist, and I was always shouldn't you just be a person? What?
Well, yeah, it's the whole no true Scotsman thing. It's like, only a true Scotsman would put, sugar in his porridge or something. And it's just like, feminism. I looked at feminism for quite a while in the early days of my channel, and it is such a mini splintered philosophy. There's intersectional feminists, there's radical feminists, there's environmental feminists, there's sex positive feminists. It's really, it's sort of like saying I'm a Christian. That really doesn't tell you anything about your beliefs, because anything could fall into that category. I mean, you could technically be a Baptist and still say you're a Christian. But then, a Methodist and a Baptist coming into the room together don't believe the same things. So yeah, and feminism. I mean, I could go on for feminism for a while. Feminism has its place in the world, like second wave feminism, like actually
Yeah.
striving for actual equal rights under the law for women. Great. The Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA that keeps being talked about. I'm all for it. I'm all for it because it said that in nowhere in law, effectively, shall anyone be treated differently on the basis of their sex. Like, great, do it.
Yeah.
Of course, the reason that it's not in place is primarily because feminists back in the 80s petitioned against it, because if they did that, that would mean women would be eligible for the draft.
Oh yeah.
Because you couldn't say only men of 18 years and older. Under law, if there can be no distinction between the genders, welcome to the draft, ladies. Welcome to selective service. Yeah, and I'm not making that up. You can look it up. The ERA was initially trounced down by women's groups who were afraid of the possibility of certain things happening regarding the draft and other things that would become true if it were in place. But I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean I mean now there's so much infighting with like trans rights versus feminism.
Oh,
Call them,
yeah.
And I thought it was interesting, the Ukraine thing. They basically said every man has to stay in the country. And I was like, huh. And then I just saw I didn't know if that was totally true or not, but something about a trans woman having to stay because she was technically born a man or something.
Oh, I couldn't say. I haven't seen every news story. Yeah, it's really interesting how a lot of people who 2 weeks ago would, and you can see this on Twitter. Somebody's I think already made a collection of things where it's comparing tweets where one day someone's like all guns should be eliminated, and then a week later it's like give the Ukrainians AK-47s, in defense of this, that, and that. Yeah, it really is, whichever direction the wind blows on a particular day.
I know that I was just talking about that, how it's like, ban all guns are bad, and then it's like, for Ukraine it's fine.
Yeah, yeah, a gun in every home for Ukraine to defend themselves against the Russian military. Oh, but here in America, someone owning a gun in their home, that's inherently evil or something.
Yeah. And I was like, man, I would be stressed about that announcement being made if it was in the US. Like, okay, every guy can't leave the country because you may have to defend. And it was such a wide age range. Like, I'm always like, well, if there was a draft, I'm 38, so
well, I mean, yeah, I mean that was the truth for our country back in the 60s and 70s with Vietnam. You could be drafted at any particular time. It hasn't been invoked since then, and it would probably require something very drastic for it to happen again. But yeah, now it's and again, it's also a reflection to be, at least it should be a reflection of people, just how good we have it here. I mean, America as a country and everything is vilified by, and it's perfectly fine to do so. But I think it should be an informed vilification, at least have some idea of, as compared to the rest of the world, how good we have it here in relation. Some people saying America's the worst country on the planet, or I want to leave here because it's this, that, and the other. Like, hey, pick another country you want to live in and live there for a while, and then let's see whether or not you'd rather be here. Because I keep seeing, I've seen several times people extolling the virtues of healthcare in Cuba. Like a socialized healthcare in Cuba or something. Like, well, hey, if you want to go live in Cuba because this place is so terrible, by all means, give it a shot. See how you like it for about a year, or you probably, if you last a year before you want to come running back here. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's what probably. I mean, the last time back when George W. Bush was in, I was worried about the draft back then when I was like 20.
Yeah,
and I did probably vote because of that. And people now still freak out sometimes, like, oh. I think even when this happened, they were like, "Oh, the draft's coming," or like, and they were worried when Trump was in that he would just go to war randomly.
Yeah.
And Yeah, people used to be like, I'm going to Canada if Trump wins, and then and then now I'm like, yeah, I'm not so into Canada anymore after they're
Yeah,
using people's bank accounts.
exactly. All depends on the day. All depends on who's in charge and whether or not they're in a good mood or not, or if the people are on their side or not. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess they don't really have freedom of speech there or something. 'Cause I remember there was some that
Well,
got
it certainly doesn't seem like it based
yeah.
on recent events. Yeah.
Yeah, there was something you mentioned on Kurt's thing that you came up with like a your own TEDx talk that it was like
Yes. Yeah. So I came up with a formula based on the number of TEDx talks I've seen. So the idea is you first think of a concept or a subject that all by itself is a good thing.
oh yeah.
So like happiness or friendship, or in the case of my fake TEDx thing, I thought tranquility. Like there's a descriptor for you. Like think of something that's good or nice or pleasant, and then decide, are you for or against this thing? If you're for this thing, you put in front of it something to the effect of radical. So radical happiness, right? And then you reverse engineer that phrase into a talk. If you want to be against this thing, you put the word or something to the effect of toxic in front of it. So toxic happiness. What could toxic happiness be? And so for mine, I came up with malicious tranquility. I came up with the phrase first and I worked backwards. And all it was just this big guilt trip of like, your comfort is someone else's pain. So you have to make yourself uncomfortable in order to
Yeah.
empathize with their pain. And so what you want, so I suggest that at your own, the place you inhabit, your own apartment, your own home, you take a giant bag of Legos and dump them on the floor and never wear shoes in your house again, because you need to feel the kind of pain and discomfort it is to navigate your own habitat, just as everyone else out there who is not as fortunate as you are has to navigate the world and all of its dangers too. When you go to bed, I want you to change all of your sheets from silk and satin to burlap so that you are always uncomfortable, because just as the marginalized in our world are unable to sleep well, so should you. And like that kind of thing. It's like, and now it's nonsense. But if I actually had somebody on a TEDx put that stuff up there,
Yeah.
I bet dollars and donuts, a lot of people would be hard pressed to think that the person was joking.
Yeah. It reminds me of like for a few years now, every holiday that goes by, people are on Twitter are like, oh, July 4th. Well, by the way, you're living on stolen land or something like that.
Yep. There can be no
You
fun. There
can't
can be no sport.
enjoy.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I mean, you could also do like, one day you walk on, I don't know, or you put mines in your apartment because some people went to war.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's like, yeah, it's like, other people have to deal with the scars of war. So shoot yourself in the arm.
yeah,
Then you'll
or like,
know. Then you'll have some idea.
um, when all the George Floyd stuff was happening, there was like videos of people like whipping themselves, like as if it was like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. I don't
like
know.
extreme stuff like that. And there was those like, I guess there was like dinners of white women being scolded or something by black women
Oh,
they would pay to go to or something.
I hadn't seen that, but I like I say, I wouldn't disbelieve you if you told me that happpened, because I've seen crazier things these days. So yeah.
Yeah, like that whole thing about just identity. I've been watching.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Kurt had a guy on there. I guess there was a thing called Comicsgate with like the comic book community.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it abstractly, but I don't know all the details. But yeah, it was just another sort of purity test amongst comic book artists
Yeah,
about, yeah.
And it is like it actually did start to make sense to me with like the superhero, like they would want to make superheroes out of like just any marginalized group, like because that's kind of how they act. Like, oh, you're well, a lot of the TEDx's, it seems like they're just like, make blank your superpower.
Yeah, it's the and you know, people like the lady on the TEDx I was just looking at was railing against tokenism,
Oh yeah,
where you're just putting somebody in that place because you're trying to make things look good. But then you have the same people who would oppose that kind of thinking start pushing for diversity, equity, and inclusion and hiring practices and this, that, and the other. When the only way that that works is if you're selecting people on the basis of their aesthetics,
yeah,
and yet that's supposed. Yet when they say it, it's a good thing. But if anybody else were to actually practice it in real life, otherwise, it would obviously be not only a bad thing, depending on the circumstances, probably illegal. So,
yeah. It is interesting. Yeah, that talk was interesting because it was like they almost some of her thing almost like I kind of agree almost in some things, like where they're like, if you're trying to be a white ally and you go overboard, to me that does seem like ironically racist or whatever. Like, well, you talk about treating people
yeah.
like they have a disability or whatever, but then
Mm-hmm.
they criticize people that are trying to go by the rules they set themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that there's always an element of something you can empathize with. Like if
Yeah,
I just describe to you like somebody who tries too hard to help or acts without thinking or asking questions, they mean well, but they end up doing something stupid. We can all think or imagine, if we haven't already experienced ourselves, we can imagine a real life example of that or something similar to that, just
yeah,
in general, and that's fine. And if you were to say, don't be like Gary. Gary does this, that, and the other, and he went too far. Okay, but then you put a racial connotation on it. What does that What does that mean? Like somehow this is specific to people who look a particular way. It's not a human occurrence. You can't have somebody who tries too hard to help just in general. Why does it have to be about race? And that adds a whole other element to the meaning and the value of what the person is saying, because the implication then is that other people who don't look like this are better people because they don't act like this. Like,
yeah,
well, yeah, yeah. So if she was talking about how to be a good friend or how to be a
yeah,
helpful person without overdoing it, or here's some advice to be, I like I said, the title by itself, Your Journey to Allyship. If she was just talking about, here's how to be a helpful person in general, here's where you could go overboard, here's where you need to ask questions first, I'd have almost nothing to say probably, but
yeah.
that's not where she went. That's not what she was talking about. So,
Yeah, I mean, you can't be too self-righteous about it.
oh, dude, that's an inside joke for anybody listening, but yeah, there
Yeah,
was
I
a
hadn't.
slam poet speaker a few shows back who classified himself as self-righteous. And like the first time, spoiler alert if you ever watch it, but yeah, the first time he says it, I pause the video and I'm like, okay, either that was a Freudian slip or that was just like the greatest little bit of wordplay I've heard recently. And then he repeated it again. He says, no, let me say it again. Self-white, like, okay, so he meant it. He
Yeah,
meant it. Yeah, no, it's a great. I'm amazed I hadn't come up with it myself before. He might not be the first person to have ever said it. I don't want to give him credit, but yeah, no, that was a moment.
yeah. Oh yeah. By the way, my background, it was like an homage to your being on the moon.
Hmm. On Mars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um.
Yeah, that's my. I live on the moon. I don't know that became a joke a long time ago in a different show, and it just kind of stuck.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you said you just had friends that kind of turned against you. So you didn't really, did you not have anything else like with work that you noticed? This kind of stuff?
I've been very fortunate in that I've had, even throughout the pandemic and everything else, I've been employed full time. I work for a small company, been there for years and years and years. And none of this stuff has ever become a part of my company's goings on. It's never become a, we have a lot of different people that work in my company from all over the place, but they're not there because they're visibly different. We don't have those conversations, those difficult conversations. It's never been an issue. So I've been very, people that I know in my family and elsewise, they have had to go through training sessions and this, that, and the other. And yeah, but so, knock wood, fingers crossed. To this point, yeah, we're such a small company, and none of those issues have ever. I mean, it's like still being in 2002 or something before any of this became anybody's problem. And so hopefully I'll never have to encounter it directly. If I do, I'm not quite sure what I'd say. It depends on what they're requiring me to do with my real time. If I have to sit through some kind of class, some kind of here's if I have to sit in some kind of re-education class for an hour or something at work, I'll sit through it. It depends on what they're going to be requiring me afterwards that may or may not be a deal breaker.
Yeah, I did look into like all this stuff kind of remind like I looked into the Cultural Revolution in China. That does remind me of, I guess they used to like publicly shame people and
Yep. There are a lot of not dissimilar comparisons that can be made with what happened there and what's going on online and with certain certain groups. Yeah, so you keep your eyes, your ears, and your mind open, and don't let little things like that pass over you as though they're not concerning.
Yeah, everybody check out Scribe Light's YouTube channel. Are you on? You don't have like you're not on like the podcast app or anything?
No, I've had people recommend to me in the past that I should turn my shows into a podcast or just make like audio only or something. I've never done it. I still, even though it might not be quite true anymore, I still try to look at my YouTube stuff as a hobby and not a profession. But I'm not going to argue with anybody who says otherwise. But maybe someday. But no plans right now. But yeah, otherwise I got my YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitter. It's just Scribe_Light. And elsewise,
and you're not on. I couldn't find you on any other like Facebook or Instagram.
No, I'm not on Facebook. Yeah, like I say, as far as marketing myself as a YouTuber, I'm terrible at it.
Well, I did. You do have some merch.
Yes, I have. I have been encouraged over the several years to make some merchandise. I have some Teespring mugs and shirts and some inside jokes on some of those shirts. And there's a link in the description of my videos if you want to check out my little. I have a TED Excellence mug if you want a little bit more TED Excellence in your life, and that's. So I got 2 shows a week that I do for sure. Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern is TED Excellence, where I take a look at a TED and/or TEDx talk of various subject matters, depending on what catches my eye in a week. And then Sundays, as I just did earlier this morning, I do a Sunday stream, which could be anything. It's kind of like grab bag, potpourri subject matter at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. And but beyond that, I have a giant library of scripted videos from the past and things. I really started doing a lot of live streaming when the lockdown happened because it was more of a relaxation at that point, not being able to leave the house. And that just kind of stuck over time.
Yeah. Well, it's really professional, all the stuff you have. I was wondering.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Film school or something.
No, I am 100% novice. Don't trust anything this man says.
All right, yeah. Thanks a lot for coming on, and yeah, great talking. Great talk. I've been looking forward to talking to somebody about all this stuff because it's kind of hard to find people that have been looking into it like you have.
Oh well, thank you for having me on, Brian. And if you want some other voices to talk to about it, I know I'm friends with several YouTubers who probably wouldn't mind having to talk.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, that'd be really cool. Yeah, I'll reach out. Yeah, thanks for staying on.
Sure.
Yeah, everybody, go buy his merch.
That's the important message.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks. And yeah. All right. Make sure you do the work. And
Yep. Always.
I'm gonna step down myself and just do the work. So.
Okay. Well. All right, dude.
Yeah,
Well, you
have a
take
great
care.
day. Yeah.
Yep.
You too.
Bye bye.
All right. See ya. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Re-educate yourself, everyone. Yes, everyone.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah.